Jasmine Washington stood frozen in the airplane aisle as the captain's voice crackled over the intercom announcing the grounding of Flight 2187. Security personnel approached with stern faces. The white woman who had denied Jasmine her seat now turned pale with shock. Jasmine's calm smile contrasted sharply with the building tension. Justice was about to be served. Before we dive into this incredible story, where are you watching from today? Drop your location in the comments. And if you're new here, hit that subscribe button and notification bell because stories like Jasmine's need to be heard. Now let's rewind to see how this powerful black CEO found herself in this high-stakes confrontation at 30,000 feet. The morning had started with immense promise. Jasmine Washington, CEO of Skyline Innovations, had just concluded a high-stakes meeting with Department of Defense officials regarding her company's revolutionary aircraft technology. As she gathered her presentation materials and shook hands with the military contractors, she couldn't help but feel a familiar mixture of pride and exhaustion. Ms. Washington, the secretary was very impressed with your propulsion system designs, said Colonel Hayes, the senior military liaison. We haven't seen efficiency ratings like this from any other contractor. Jasmine nodded professionally. Thank you, Colonel. My team has been working on these innovations for nearly 5 years. What she didn't mention was how those 5 years built upon a lifetime of overcoming obstacles. Growing up in a modest apartment in Harlem with her single mother who worked 2 jobs, Jasmine had shown exceptional aptitude for mathematics and physics from an early age. Despite attending underfunded public schools, her brilliance had earned her a scholarship to MIT, where she graduated at the top of her aerospace engineering class. The journey from that Harlem apartment to founding Skyline Innovations had been anything but smooth. For every door her talents opened, 3 more seemed to close because of her race and gender. Venture capitalists who were eager to meet the mind behind the revolutionary designs would often lose interest upon discovering she was a black woman. Perhaps we could meet with your technical director instead, they would suggest, assuming she was merely a figurehead. But Jasmine had persevered, bootstrapping her company with small government grants until her patented designs became too valuable to ignore. Now, at 42, she led one of the most innovative aerospace firms in the country, with over 300 employees and contracts worth hundreds of millions of dollars. As she exited the Pentagon meeting room, her executive assistant Terrence Brooks fell into step beside her. How did it go? He asked, taking her briefcase as they navigated the long corridors. They're on board, Jasmine replied. But Stevens Aerospace is making a counterpitch next week, so nothing's finalized. Terrence nodded, his expression serious. That's why I've been trying to reach you. The Chicago investors moved up the meeting to tomorrow morning. If we don't secure their funding before the Stevens presentation. Jasmine stopped walking. Tomorrow? That's impossible. I have 3 meetings scheduled here tomorrow, and the prototype demonstration. I know, but Marshall says they're heading to Dubai afterward for 2 weeks. It's now or we wait, and waiting means, Stevens gets ahead of us, Jasmine finished his sentence. She took a deep breath. All right, get me on the next flight to Chicago. Move my meetings to video conference where possible, and have Aaliyah handle the prototype demo. Terrence was already typing rapidly on his tablet. There's a flight from Reagan in 2 hours. If we leave now, you'll make it. As they hurried toward the exit, Jasmine's phone rang. The familiar photo of her husband Michael and their daughter Zoe lit up the screen. Hey loves, she answered, her voice softening. Mom, came 12-year-old Zoe's excited voice. I got the lead in the science fair. My renewable energy project was selected to represent the school. Pride swelled in Jasmine's chest. That's amazing, baby. I knew you could do it. When are you coming home to help me finish it? Zoe asked, the eagerness in her voice unmistakable. Jasmine's heart sank as she exchanged glances with Terrence, who held up the flight information. I have to go to Chicago tonight, sweetie. But I'll be back tomorrow evening, and we'll work on it all night if we need to. The momentary silence on the other end spoke volumes. "Zoe understands," came Michael's voice, supportive as always. "Don't you, Zoe?" "Yeah," came the subdued reply. "It's okay." After promises to call before bedtime and to bring back Chicago-style pizza, Jasmine ended the call feeling the familiar guilt that accompanied her success. Her family sacrificed so much for her career, yet that career was precisely what gave them opportunities she never had growing up. As they reached the car, Colonel Hayes called out from behind them. "Ms. Washington, one more thing." Jasmine turned, professional smile in place. "Just wanted to say, it's refreshing to see someone like you succeeding in this field. You're very articulate in your presentations." The backhanded compliment hung in the air. Jasmine had heard variations of this countless times, the surprise that she could be both black and brilliant, as if the two were mutually exclusive. "Thank you, Colonel," she replied evenly. "I find clear communication is essential when discussing concepts that are difficult for some to grasp." The subtle rebuke wasn't lost on the Colonel, whose smile faltered slightly. As she slid into the back seat of the waiting car, Terence murmured, "Twice as good." For half the recognition, Jasmine completed the familiar refrain that had become almost a mantra among black professionals. The car pulled away, racing against time to make the flight that would change everything. Reagan National Airport bustled with mid-afternoon travelers when Jasmine's car pulled up to the departure's curb. Terence had called ahead to expedite her check-in, but even with her executive platinum status, the clock was ticking dangerously close to boarding time. "I've emailed you the investor profiles," Terence said, handing her the carry-on he'd packed with emergency essentials. After 7 years as her assistant, he knew exactly what she needed. "And I've notified the Chicago office to have the presentation materials ready. Will you need anything else?" Jasmine took the bag, mentally reviewing her checklist. "Just make sure the prototype test results are forwarded to me as soon as they're complete." "And Terence?" "Thank you." He nodded, understanding the gratitude extended beyond today's arrangements. In an industry where Jasmine was often the only black woman in the room, having staff who respected her authority without question was invaluable. Inside the terminal, Jasmine strode purposefully toward the priority check-in counter, her tailored navy suit and confident bearing marking her as a seasoned business traveler. Yet the white agent glanced past her to the businessman standing behind her before reluctantly making eye contact. "Platinum check-in?" the agent asked, the question itself suggesting Jasmine might be in the wrong place. "Yes," Jasmine replied simply, sliding her ID and platinum membership card across the counter. She'd learned long ago that defensiveness only reinforced stereotypes about angry black women. Instead, she let her credentials speak for themselves. The agent's demeanor shifted subtly as she processed the boarding pass. "I apologize for the wait, Ms. Washington. You've been upgraded to first class." Jasmine accepted the boarding pass with a polite, "Thank you," though the upgrade wasn't surprising, her travel profile automatically requested it. As she turned toward security, she noted the businessman who had been behind her receiving a much warmer greeting. These micro-inequities had become so routine that she categorized them almost clinically. Was it worth the emotional energy to address, or better to conserve that energy for bigger battles? The security checkpoint presented its own familiar hurdle. Despite being dressed in conservative business attire with her hair in a simple updo, Jasmine was directed to the full-body scanner while several white travelers were waved through the metal detector. "Random selection," the TSA agent stated flatly when she made eye contact. After the scan, a female agent pulled her aside. "We'll need to check your hair." Jasmine stood stoically as gloved hands patted her hair, aware of the stares from other travelers. The random hair check for black women with natural hairstyles was anything but random, as lawsuit after lawsuit had demonstrated. Her briefcase received extra scrutiny as well, each compartment searched thoroughly. She watched carefully as they handled her classified documents folder, concerned that the rough handling might damage the contents. "What's your business in Chicago?" the agent asked, an inquiry Jasmine noted wasn't being made of other business travelers. Investor meeting, she replied simply. You're an investor. The skepticism was thinly veiled. I'm a CEO seeking investment, Jasmine clarified, her tone neutral despite the implicit assumption that she couldn't be the one in charge. After finally clearing security and repacking her carefully organized briefcase, Jasmine checked her watch. The extra scrutiny had cost her precious minutes. As she hurried toward her gate, a young black man in his mid-20s stopped in his tracks, his expression shifting from surprise to admiration. Excuse me, are you Jasmine Washington? From Skyline Innovations? Jasmine paused, offering a genuine smile. I am. Andre Wilson, he said, extending his hand. I'm an engineer at Meridian Tech. Your paper on high-altitude propulsion systems completely changed my understanding of aerospace dynamics. The encounter instantly lifted Jasmine's spirits. This was why she persisted through the daily indignities, for moments like this. That's wonderful to hear, Andre. Are you specializing in propulsion systems? Trying to, he admitted. It's challenging being the only black engineer in my department. I sometimes wonder if I'll ever move up from entry level. Jasmine recognized the doubt in his eyes, she had felt it herself countless times. Do you have a card? I'd like to connect you with our head of engineering for an informational interview. Andre's eyes widened as he fumbled for his wallet. That would be incredible, Ms. Washington. Jasmine, she corrected, accepting his card. We need more brilliant minds like yours in aerospace. The industry's loss of diverse talent is a tragedy I'm working to correct. As they exchanged contact information, Jasmine noticed a commotion at the nearby coffee kiosk. A middle-aged white woman with an expensive handbag and highlighted blonde hair cut directly in front of several waiting customers. Excuse me, the barista began. I'm in a hurry, the woman interrupted sharply. First-class boarding starts in 10 minutes. Vanilla latte, extra hot, no foam. The resigned expressions of the other customers and the barista's forced smile spoke volumes about how frequently this woman's type of entitlement went unchallenged. Some people live in their own reality, Andre commented quietly. Jasmine nodded. And expect the rest of us to accommodate it. After promising to email Andre about the informational interview, Jasmine continued toward her gate, aware that the entitled woman appeared to be heading in the same direction. As the boarding announcement for first-class passengers on Flight 2187 to Chicago came over the loudspeaker, Jasmine quickened her pace, briefcase in hand, unaware that the woman from the coffee shop was about to become much more than a passing observation. First-class passengers for Flight 2187 to Chicago, we invite you to board at this time. Jasmine approached the gate, boarding pass and ID ready. The gate agent smiled professionally, scanning her documents and motioning her through. Enjoy your flight, Ms. Washington. The jetway stretched before her as Jasmine mentally shifted gears, reviewing key points for tomorrow's investor meeting. With Stevens Aerospace circling the same funding sources, she needed to be flawlessly prepared. The thought of her competitor brought a slight frown. Stevens had a reputation for aggressive tactics, though nothing explicitly illegal had ever been proven. Stepping onto the aircraft, Jasmine nodded politely to the flight attendants. The coffee shop woman sat there, engrossed in her phone, designer sunglasses perched on her head despite being inside the aircraft. Excuse me, Jasmine said politely. I believe you're in my seat. The woman barely glanced up. No, this is my seat. I'm in 3A, Jasmine clarified, displaying her boarding pass. Window seat. This time, the woman looked up fully, her eyes making a quick, dismissive assessment of Jasmine. There must be some mistake. I always sit in first class, 3A. Perhaps on other flights, Jasmine replied evenly. But for this flight, 3A is my assigned seat. The woman's expression hardened. Look, I'm sure you're confused. The economy section is that way. She gestured toward the back of the plane. The implication was unmistakable, and Jasmine felt a familiar heat rise in her chest, the controlled anger of someone who had faced this scenario in various forms throughout her professional life. "I'm not confused," Jasmine stated firmly. "I have a first-class ticket for seat 3A. Would you like to check your boarding pass to confirm your seat assignment?" The confrontation was beginning to draw attention from nearby passengers. A middle-aged black man across the aisle watched with a knowing expression, while a young white couple pretended not to notice, suddenly fascinated by the safety card. A flight attendant, Brian Taylor according to his name tag, approached with a professionally neutral expression. "Is there a problem here?" he asked. Before Jasmine could respond, the woman spoke. "This person thinks she has my seat. Can you please direct her to the correct section?" The subtle emphasis on person and the assumption that Jasmine didn't belong in first class weren't lost on anyone within earshot. Brian turned to Jasmine with a slightly condescending smile. "Ma'am, first-class passengers have already been seated. May I see your boarding pass?" Jasmine handed it over without comment, maintaining her composure despite the familiar scenario unfolding, being asked to prove she belonged in spaces where her presence was automatically questioned. Brian checked the boarding pass, his expression shifting as he confirmed Jasmine was indeed assigned to 3A. He turned to the seated woman. "Ma'am, could I see your boarding pass as well?" With visible annoyance, the woman produced her boarding pass. Brian examined it. "Ms. Mitchell, your assigned seat is actually 3C, the aisle seat in this row, not 3A. Karen Mitchell's expression tightened. "That's impossible. I specifically requested a window seat." "I understand your preference," Brian replied, "but your assigned seat for this flight is 3C. I need to ask you to move to your correct seat so Ms. Washington can take her assigned seat." Karen didn't budge. "I get motion sickness in aisle seats. I need the window." "Then you should have booked a window seat," Jasmine stated matter-of-factly. Karen's eyes flashed with indignation. "Excuse me? Do you know who I am?" "Someone in my seat," Jasmine replied calmly. The tension escalated as Karen turned back to the flight attendant. "This is ridiculous. I'm a platinum member. I fly this route twice monthly. I understand, Ms. Mitchell, but seat assignments are final unless changed by the airline. Ms. Washington has been assigned 3A for this flight." Karen's voice rose. "So you're going to make me move because she complained? Is that how it works now? She plays the race card and everyone jumps?" The accusation hung in the air. Several passengers looked away uncomfortably while others watched with undisguised interest. Jasmine had never mentioned race, Karen had introduced that element herself, revealing the underlying assumption behind her resistance. "Ms. Mitchell," Brian said, his voice lowering, "no one has mentioned race. This is simply about assigned seating. Please gather your belongings and move to seat 3C. Finally, with theatrical huffing, Karen collected her items and shifted to the aisle seat, muttering audibly about preferential treatment and political correctness. Jasmine took her rightful seat by the window, maintaining her professional demeanor despite the humiliation of having to fight for what was unquestionably hers. As she settled in, she noticed several dynamics playing out among the nearby passengers, sympathy from some, discomfort from others, and from a few, the unmistakable surprise at seeing how she had handled the confrontation without the emotional outburst that stereotypes might have led them to expect. The black man across the aisle caught her eye and gave a subtle nod of solidarity. Jasmine returned the gesture, then turned her attention to preparing her workspace for the flight. She placed her briefcase under the seat in front of her, noticing as she did that Karen was still watching her with poorly concealed hostility. Rather than engage further, Jasmine removed her tablet and the folder containing the classified DoD documents she would need to reference for her investor presentation. As the remaining passengers boarded, she tried to refocus on the work ahead, but a nagging sense of unease remained. The confrontation had been resolved on paper, but the tension still simmered in seat 3C. Brian returned to their row. "Can I get either of you a pre-departure beverage?" "Sparkling water, thank you," Jasmine requested. "Chardonnay," Karen stated flatly. "Make it a double." As Brian moved on, Jasmine opened her briefcase to retrieve her noise-canceling headphones, and froze. Something wasn't right. The classified documents folder appeared slightly thinner than before, its contents subtly disturbed from their careful organization. Had the TSA search been more invasive than she realized? Or? She glanced sideways at Karen, who was now typing rapidly on her phone, her body language tense and purposeful rather than merely annoyed. The pieces weren't quite fitting together, but Jasmine's instincts, honed through years of navigating hostile corporate environments, told her something beyond casual racism was at play. As the flight attendants prepared for departure, she made a quick decision to take subtle precautions while assessing the situation further. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome aboard Flight 2187 to Chicago. We're just waiting for a few passengers, and then we'll be on our way. Flight time today is approximately 2 hours." Jasmine fastened her seatbelt, her mind racing faster than the plane would soon be. This flight was quickly becoming about much more than a seat assignment. The aircraft began its taxi toward the runway as Jasmine methodically assessed the contents of her briefcase. A growing sense of alarm tightened her chest when she confirmed her suspicion. Pages from the Department of Defense file were definitely missing. Not all of them, that would have been too obvious. But specific technical schematics detailing the proprietary technology that made Skyline's propulsion systems revolutionary. How could this have happened? Jasmine's mind raced through possibilities. Had she left documents at the Pentagon? No, she distinctly remembered Terrence helping her pack everything. Had they fallen out during the TSA search? Unlikely, she'd been vigilant throughout, precisely because of the sensitive nature of the materials. What would you do if you discovered someone had stolen proprietary information from you? Comment number 1 if you'd confront them immediately, or number 2 if you'd gather evidence first. Don't forget to like and subscribe to see more stories of justice served. What do you think is really happening with Karen Mitchell? Let's continue to find out. As the plane continued taxiing, Jasmine's phone vibrated with an incoming text. Normally she would have already switched to airplane mode, but she was grateful for the oversight when she saw the message from Terrence: "Urgent, security breach at HQ, server access attempted from unknown location. Nothing compromised but trying to trace. Call when you land." The timing couldn't be coincidental. Jasmine glanced at Karen, who was still focused intently on her phone, thumbs flying across the screen as if racing against time. For someone who had been belligerent about a seat assignment, she now seemed completely absorbed in something far more urgent than in-flight comfort. Jasmine's mind flashed back to the TSA checkpoint. The extended search of her briefcase, the unusual questions. Had someone been stalling her deliberately? And then another detail surfaced: Karen hadn't just been in her seat, she'd been there before first-class boarding was even announced. How had she gotten on the plane so early? Looking more closely at her seatmate without appearing to stare, Jasmine noticed other details that seemed out of place. Karen's designer bag had a subtly misaligned logo. Her jewelry was expensive but not the luxury brands a genuine high-status executive would wear. Even her supposed entitlement seemed performed rather than natural, slightly exaggerated, as if playing a role. Then it hit her: where had she seen Karen before? Not on this flight, not at the coffee kiosk, but somewhere else. Recently. Jasmine closed her eyes briefly, accessing her exceptional visual memory. The Stevens Aerospace website. The staff photo from their last corporate retreat. She hadn't been prominently featured, but Jasmine was certain Karen had been in that photo, standing in the back row. Just then, Karen stood abruptly. "I need to use the restroom." "We're about to take off," Brian the flight attendant reminded her as he passed by. "You'll need to remain seated until we reach cruising altitude." "It's an emergency," Karen insisted, already moving into the aisle. Ma'am, I'm sorry, but it's a federal regulation. The captain has turned on the fasten seatbelt sign. Karen's face flushed with what appeared to be anger but what Jasmine now recognized as anxiety. Fine, she snapped, returning to her seat. Jasmine observed how Karen's hand trembled slightly as she reached for her phone again, quickly typing what looked like, delayed. Security issue. We'll try again. The pieces were falling into place. This wasn't random racism or entitlement, this was corporate espionage. Karen Mitchell, if that was even her real name, had likely been instructed to get close to Jasmine on this flight. The seat confusion wasn't coincidental, it was a ploy to create a distraction while assessing the contents of Jasmine's briefcase. But how had they known she would be on this specific flight? The Chicago meeting had been moved up just hours ago. Unless... Jasmine discreetly typed a message to her head of security, check Terrence's computer and phone for monitoring software. Possible internal breach. She hated the thought. Terrence had been with her for 7 years, and she trusted him implicitly. But professional espionage often exploited trusted channels rather than creating new ones. The captain's voice came over the intercom. Flight attendants, prepare for takeoff. Jasmine slipped her phone into airplane mode but kept it in her hand. She needed to act, but confronting Karen directly would be a mistake. If this was indeed corporate espionage, Karen would likely have contingency plans and possibly accomplices. Jasmine needed to alert authorities without tipping her hand. Beside her, Karen shifted uncomfortably, checking her watch repeatedly. Her urgency suggested whatever plan was in motion had a specific timeline. Ladies and gentlemen, came the captain's voice again, we've been asked to hold position momentarily. Air traffic control is reporting some congestion ahead of us. We should be moving shortly. Karen's expression tightened further. The delay clearly hadn't been part of her plan. Jasmine used the opportunity to access the in-flight Wi-Fi system, which was active even though they hadn't taken off. Rather than sending emails that might be monitored, she logged into her company's secure messaging platform through a VPN and contacted her security team directly. Potential corporate espionage in progress. Flight 2187 to Chicago. Subject seated next to me has taken DoD documents. Believed to be Stevens aerospace operative. Alert FBI and Air Marshal if on board. Documents contain classified information. Within moments, she received confirmation that her message had been received and authorities were being contacted. The head of security also confirmed they were investigating the potential monitoring of Terrence's devices. Just then, Brian approached their row again. Ladies and gentlemen, I've just been informed there will be a slight additional delay. We apologize for the inconvenience. Jasmine noticed how Brian's eyes lingered on Karen for a fraction longer than normal, and how he made brief eye contact with a serious-looking man seated a few rows behind them. The subtle exchange confirmed her suspicion, an air marshal was indeed on board, and he had been alerted. Karen's phone buzzed, and Jasmine caught a glimpse of the message, abort. Security alerted. Karen's face went pale. She immediately stood up again. I really need to use the bathroom now. It's an emergency. This time, Brian's response was different. Of course, ma'am. Let me just check if the lavatory is available. His tone was accommodating but his posture had changed subtly, becoming more alert. As Karen made her way to the lavatory, Jasmine noticed her clutching her handbag tightly against her body. The bathroom door had barely closed when the captain's voice came over the intercom again, this time with a different message. Ladies and gentlemen, due to a technical issue, we'll be returning to the gate. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened. Flight attendants, prepare the cabin for arrival. A murmur of disappointment and frustration spread through the cabin, but Jasmine felt a surge of grim satisfaction. The technical issue was clearly a pretext. The authorities had been quick to respond. Minutes later, Karen emerged from the lavatory looking noticeably more composed, though Jasmine suspected the apparent calm masked intense anxiety. As she returned to her seat, Jasmine noticed her handbag seemed lighter, less bulky than before. "Did they say how long the delay will be?" Karen asked, her voice casual but strained. "They're taking us back to the gate," Jasmine replied evenly. "Technical issue, apparently." Karen's practiced smile couldn't hide the flash of panic in her eyes. "How annoying. I have an important meeting in Chicago." "So do I," Jasmine said, meeting Karen's gaze directly. "With investors who might be very interested to know that Stevens Aerospace resorts to stealing from competitors." The color drained from Karen's face. "I don't know what you're talking about." "I think you do, Ms. Mitchell, if that's your real name. The FBI will be very interested in those classified documents you took from my briefcase. Industrial espionage involving Department of Defense materials carries a minimum 10-year sentence." For a moment, Karen seemed frozen in shock. Then she leaned closer, her voice a harsh whisper. "You have no proof." "The bathroom trash might disagree," Jasmine replied calmly. "You didn't destroy the documents, did you? Just hid them. Too valuable to flush, too incriminating to keep on your person when you realized security had been alerted." Karen's silence confirmed Jasmine's hypothesis. As the plane gradually taxied back to the terminal, Jasmine could see police vehicles and what appeared to be FBI agents already waiting on the tarmac. The flight that was supposed to take Jasmine to an investor meeting had instead grounded a corporate spy. And as realization dawned on the woman beside her, Jasmine felt not triumph but a weary recognition that even her professional accomplishments couldn't shield her from those who would automatically underestimate her because of her race, a prejudice that, in this case, had proven to be Karen Mitchell's fatal mistake. As Flight 2187 approached the gate, a tense silence hung between Jasmine and Karen. The other first-class passengers sensed something significant was unfolding, though most remained oblivious to the actual situation. Some complained about the delay, others speculated about mechanical issues, but the air marshal, who Jasmine now identified as Samuel Reed based on his subtle communication with the flight crew, maintained vigilant observation of their row. Brian, the flight attendant who had initially hesitated to support Jasmine during the seating dispute, now moved with purposeful efficiency. He had been briefed on the situation and was clearly following protocol for a security incident. "Ladies and gentlemen," the captain announced as they reached the gate, "we apologize for the inconvenience. We've been asked to deplane in an orderly fashion. Please remain seated until further instructions." Karen's composure continued to deteriorate. Her left leg bounced nervously, and she repeatedly checked her phone, which no longer displayed any new messages. Her accomplices had gone silent, either warned off or already in custody. "You've made a serious mistake," Karen whispered to Jasmine, desperation edging her voice. "Do you know what Stevens can do to your company? To your reputation?" Jasmine met her gaze steadily. "Do you know what the federal government does to people who steal classified defense information? This isn't corporate politics anymore, Ms. Mitchell. This is national security." The aircraft door opened, and two uniformed police officers appeared, followed by plainclothes agents who could only be FBI. The lead agent, a composed black woman with short natural hair and shrewd eyes, approached the flight attendant and showed her credentials. "Ladies and gentlemen," Brian announced, "due to a security matter, we'll be deplaning by rows as directed by law enforcement. Please remain seated until your row is called." The lead FBI agent conferred briefly with the air marshal before approaching Jasmine and Karen's row. "Ms. Washington," she addressed Jasmine directly, pointedly ignoring Karen. "I'm Special Agent Devin Carter, FBI. Could you and your seatmate please come with me?" Karen stood abruptly. "This is outrageous. I have rights." "Yes, ma'am, you do," Agent Carter replied coolly. "Including the right to remain silent, which I suggest you exercise at this time." As they were escorted off the plane ahead of the other passengers, Jasmine noticed Andre Wilson, the young engineer she'd met at the airport, watching wide-eyed from several rows back. Their eyes met briefly, and she gave him a slight nod, silently communicating that despite appearances, she was not in trouble. In the jetway, they were met by additional agents who immediately separated them. Karen was taken one direction for questioning while Agent Carter guided Jasmine to a private room in the terminal. "We need your statement, Ms. Washington, but first, are these your documents?" She displayed evidence bags containing torn paper fragments recovered from the first-class lavatory trash. Jasmine examined them through the plastic. "Yes, these are pages from my classified DoD file." She must have realized she couldn't get them off the plane and tried to destroy them, but there wasn't time. She wasn't working alone, Agent Carter confirmed. "We've detained 2 other Stevens Aerospace employees at the airport, one at the security checkpoint who appears to have created the distraction during your screening, and another at the gate who facilitated her early boarding." Jasmine processed this information. How sophisticated was this operation? "To coordinate 3 people just to get documents from my briefcase seems excessive." "It wasn't just about the documents," Agent Carter explained, her expression grave. "According to our cybersecurity team, there was a simultaneous attempt to breach your company's servers. The physical theft was likely a backup plan. We believe Stevens has been targeting your company for months." This revelation struck Jasmine like a physical blow. Months? Why wasn't this detected earlier? "Corporate espionage is notoriously difficult to prove until they make a mistake," Agent Carter explained. "And today, they made several. Starting with underestimating you because of your race." The irony wasn't lost on Jasmine. The same prejudice that had created countless obstacles throughout her career had, in this instance, worked to her advantage. Karen and her team had assumed that a black woman would be an easy target, emotionally reactive, less vigilant, less connected to authorities. Those racist assumptions had led them to attempt a brazen theft that might have been more carefully planned against a white male executive. As Agent Carter continued debriefing her, Jasmine's phone lit up with a secure message from her head of security, confirmed monitoring software on Terrence's devices. Installed 3 months ago during business conference. He had no knowledge. Stevens has been tracking your schedule, emails. Have isolated and contained breach. 3 months. For 3 months, Stevens Aerospace had been watching her movements, reading her communications, planning this operation. How many other, coincidental, setbacks had actually been their interference? The delayed shipments of prototype components. The investor who unexpectedly pulled out. The corrupted test data that had set them back weeks. Ms. Washington, Agent Carter interrupted her thoughts. "We'll need you to remain available for further questioning, but we understand you have an important meeting in Chicago tomorrow. We're arranging alternate transportation for you once we've completed your statement." Jasmine nodded, still processing the extent of Stevens' espionage campaign. "What about Karen Mitchell? What will happen to her?" "Her real name is Catherine Mercer. She's Stevens Aerospace's Director of Competitive Intelligence, essentially their corporate spy. Given the classified nature of the materials she attempted to steal, she's facing serious federal charges. Industrial espionage, theft of government property, possible violations of the Economic Espionage Act. The minimum sentence is 10 years, but given the defense applications, it could be much more." Outside the room, Jasmine could hear the commotion as passengers from Flight 2187 were being interviewed by law enforcement. Many were frustrated by the delay and confusion, unaware of the high-stakes corporate theft that had been thwarted. A knock at the door preceded Brian, the flight attendant, who entered looking contrite. "Ms. Washington, I owe you an apology," he said. "When you first boarded, I made assumptions I shouldn't have made. I'm sorry." His acknowledgement of his initial bias, assuming Jasmine was confused about her seat rather than Karen, was unexpected but appreciated. "Thank you, Brian. I understand how it looked on the surface." "No," he insisted. "I should have checked both boarding passes immediately instead of assuming." Agent Carter interjected. "Mr. Taylor, your statement indicates you noticed Ms. Mercer boarding before first class was called. Is that correct? Brian nodded. Yes. I didn't think much of it at the time. Passengers try to board early all the time, but in retrospect, she must have had help from someone at the gate. She did, Agent Carter confirmed. We have the gate agent in custody as well. This operation involved at least 5 Stevens employees that we've identified so far. 5 people. 5 conspirators coordinated just to steal from her, all because Stevens Aerospace couldn't compete with Skyline Innovation's superior technology on merit alone. The realization was both infuriating and, in a strange way, validating. They wouldn't have gone to such lengths if her company wasn't genuinely threatening their market position. Another agent entered with an update. We've secured the lavatory where the suspect attempted to dispose of the documents. Forensics is processing it now. And Ms. Washington, your executive assistant, is on a secure line. He says it's urgent regarding your Chicago meeting. Jasmine accepted the secure phone. Terrence? Are you alright? I'm fine, he assured her, though his voice was strained. Jasmine, I'm so sorry about the monitoring software. They must have installed it when I left my laptop in the hotel room during that conference in Dallas. It's not your fault, she assured him. But what's the situation with Chicago? That's why I'm calling. The investors know about the Stevens situation, it's all over the business news already. They've postponed their Dubai trip specifically to meet with you. They're impressed with how you handled the espionage attempt. Said it demonstrates exactly the kind of leadership they want to invest in. For the first time since discovering the missing documents, Jasmine felt a genuine smile form. Sometimes justice worked in unexpected ways. One more thing, Terrence added. The DoD called. In light of Stevens' espionage attempt, they're fast-tracking our contract. They're canceling Stevens' presentation entirely. As Jasmine ended the call, Agent Carter was watching her with knowing eyes. Good news, I take it. Very good news, Jasmine confirmed. It seems Stevens' attempt to sabotage my company has achieved exactly the opposite effect. Outside the room, she could hear Catherine Mercer being led away in handcuffs, loudly proclaiming her innocence despite the overwhelming evidence. The woman who had so confidently denied Jasmine her rightful seat was now facing years in federal prison, all because she and her employers had made the critical mistake of underestimating a black female CEO. As the investigation continued to unfold around her, Jasmine realized this incident would become more than a personal vindication. It would send ripples through the entire aerospace industry, a powerful message about the consequences of both corporate espionage and racial bias. The flight may have been grounded, but Jasmine Washington's trajectory remained unalterably upward. 2 hours after Flight 2187 had returned to the gate, the terminal area had transformed into an impromptu command center. FBI agents conducted interviews in private rooms, while frustrated passengers clustered in waiting areas, their travel plans disrupted by what most still believed was merely a technical issue with the aircraft. Jasmine sat in a secluded airport lounge, finishing her detailed statement for Agent Carter. Through the glass walls, she could see other agents escorting Catherine Mercer, now handcuffed, toward the exit. The woman who had been so dismissive and entitled earlier now looked small and defeated. Ms. Washington, Agent Carter said, closing her notebook, we've confirmed the full extent of the breach. In addition to the documents taken from your briefcase, Stevens Aerospace had targeted your presentation materials for tomorrow's investor meeting. They were planning to use the stolen technical specifications to undermine your pitch. By claiming we stole from them, Jasmine guessed, the strategy becoming clear. Present to the same investors with nearly identical technology, then accuse us of intellectual property theft when the similarities became apparent. Exactly. A classic corporate sabotage technique. The smaller company gets accused by the larger, established firm. Even without evidence, the cloud of suspicion often scares away investors. The calculated cruelty of the plan struck Jasmine anew. Stevens hadn't just wanted her technology, they had wanted to destroy her company's reputation and financial viability in the process. A commotion outside the lounge drew their attention. Several passengers from Flight 2187 were being rescreened by security, and one woman was loudly protesting the delay. "This is ridiculous. We've been waiting for hours. What's really going on here?" The woman's gaze landed on Jasmine through the glass, and her expression changed to one of recognition, then accusation. She pointed dramatically. "It's because of her, isn't it? Everything was fine until she got on the plane and started causing problems." Agent Carter frowned. "Excuse me for a moment, Ms. Washington." As the agent stepped outside to address the situation, Jasmine recognized the passenger. She had been seated a few rows behind them in first class and had witnessed the initial seating confrontation. Like many witnesses to discrimination, she had remained silent during the actual incident but now felt comfortable placing blame on the victim. More passengers gathered, their frustration seeking a target. Through the glass, Jasmine could hear fragments of their conversation. Holding up everyone because of a seat dispute, always making everything about race, special treatment. The narrative was already being twisted, facts discarded in favor of more comfortable fictions. Without knowing the full situation, some passengers had automatically assigned blame to the black woman at the center of the disruption rather than considering she might be the victim of a crime. Agent Carter was attempting to defuse the situation without revealing classified details of the investigation when security personnel approached with Catherine Mercer. They needed to bring her through the same area to reach the transport vehicle waiting outside. Seeing her opportunity, Catherine suddenly raised her voice. "This is all a misunderstanding. She's trying to frame me because I was in her seat. Ask anyone who saw what happened." The accusation, delivered with convincing desperation, immediately resonated with the already agitated passengers. Several nodded in agreement, their earlier observations seemingly confirming Catherine's version of events. Jasmine watched this performance with cold clarity. Catherine was making one last desperate attempt to create confusion and possibly even generate public sympathy. If she could cast doubt on Jasmine's credibility now, it might help her case later, or at least damage Skyline's reputation in the process. Agent Carter tried to hurry Catherine through the area, but the damage was being done. The crowd's energy had shifted, with several passengers now openly questioning why Jasmine wasn't the one in handcuffs. Just as the situation threatened to escalate further, a voice cut through the noise. "That's not what happened." Andre Wilson, the young engineer Jasmine had met earlier, stepped forward from the crowd. His voice was steady despite his evident nervousness at becoming the center of attention. "I saw everything at the gate before boarding. Ms. Washington was racially profiled multiple times, during check-in, at security, and again on the plane. She never played any race card. She simply asked for her assigned seat." The crowd quieted, some shifting uncomfortably as Andre continued. "And if you want to know who's really to blame for your delayed flights and missed connections, it's that woman right there." He pointed at Catherine. "She stole classified documents. That's why the FBI is involved. That's why we're all still here." Catherine's face contorted with rage. "You don't know what you're talking about. This is slander." But Andre wasn't finished. "I also saw her accessing Ms. Washington's briefcase when she thought no one was looking. I didn't realize what was happening at the time, but I remember thinking it was strange." This unexpected testimony changed the dynamics instantly. Other passengers who had witnessed pieces of the incident began to speak up, their individual observations collectively forming a more complete picture of Catherine's suspicious behavior. A businessman stepped forward. "I saw her board before they even called first class. She slipped past the gate agent somehow." An elderly woman added, "She made multiple trips to the bathroom during taxi, which I thought was odd since they kept announcing we needed to stay seated." As these accounts accumulated, the mood shifted again. The passengers who had been quick to blame Jasmine now looked embarrassed or averted their eyes altogether. Catherine, sensing her last strategy failing, resorted to more desperate measures. "She's playing all of you," she shouted. "Stevens Aerospace is being framed by a second-rate company that can't compete fairly. Washington is using her race to—" "That's enough," Agent Carter interrupted firmly, nodding to the security personnel to remove Catherine from the area. As they led her away, Catherine locked eyes with Jasmine through the glass one final time. The hatred and desperation in her gaze revealed the truth that had been there all along. Her racism wasn't just personal prejudice but a weapon she had deliberately deployed, believing it would shield her from suspicion and cast doubt on Jasmine's credibility. Once Catherine was gone, Agent Carter returned to the lounge. "I apologize for that scene, Ms. Washington. We should have used a different exit." "It's fine," Jasmine replied, though they both knew it wasn't. "What happens now?" "We've arranged a private flight to get you to Chicago for your meeting tomorrow. Stevens Aerospace's CEO has been notified of the situation and is being brought in for questioning. The company is already issuing statements trying to distance themselves from what they're calling rogue employees, but our investigation suggests this operation was authorized at the highest levels." Jasmine nodded, unsurprised. "And the documents? We've recovered all the materials. Nothing appears to have been transmitted to Stevens yet, we caught them just in time. Your company's security team has already addressed the server breach as well." As they prepared to leave the lounge, Brian the flight attendant approached with Andre Wilson. "Ms. Washington," Brian said, "we've rebooked the flight for tomorrow morning, but I wanted to personally apologize again for my role in what happened." "I appreciate that, Brian," Jasmine replied. "Most people find it difficult to acknowledge their biases, let alone apologize for them." "I'll be doing better going forward," he promised. The airline is also implementing some additional training as a result of this incident. Andre stepped forward somewhat shyly. "Ms. Washington, I just wanted to say, seeing how you handled everything today was inspiring. I almost didn't speak up, but then I thought about what you said about needing more diverse voices in aerospace." Jasmine smiled genuinely. "Thank you for finding your voice, Andre. It made a difference." She reached into her purse and handed him her business card. "My offer for an informational interview still stands. In fact, we might have some openings that would interest you." As they parted ways, Jasmine felt a complex mixture of emotions. The violation of her company's security and the blatant racism she'd experienced were infuriating. Yet there was also validation in how quickly justice had been served, and hope in seeing people like Andre and Brian learning and growing from the experience. Agent Carter escorted her toward the private terminal where her chartered flight awaited. "You know," the agent commented, "in my 15 years with the Bureau, I've investigated dozens of corporate espionage cases. This is the first time I've seen racism backfire so spectacularly against the perpetrators." "It usually works in their favor," Jasmine acknowledged. "People are more likely to believe the worst about those they already view as less than." "Stevens made a critical error in their planning," Agent Carter noted. "They factored in your race as a vulnerability to exploit, but they failed to consider your intelligence and preparedness as a successful CEO. Classic underestimation based on prejudice." As they reached the private terminal, Jasmine saw several news vans already gathering outside the main airport entrance. Word of the incident was spreading. By tomorrow, the story would be everywhere. A black female CEO whose aerospace company was targeted by corporate spies who had counted on racism to cover their tracks. "Ms. Washington," Agent Carter said as they reached the private jet, "we'll need you to testify once formal charges are filed. Based on the evidence we've gathered so far, Catherine Mercer and her accomplices will likely face substantial prison time, and Stevens Aerospace will face both criminal charges and civil liability." Jasmine nodded, gazing at the sleek aircraft that would take her to Chicago, to the investor meeting that now seemed guaranteed to succeed. "I'll be available whenever you need me, Agent Carter. Some battles are worth fighting, even when they're not the ones you planned for." As she climbed the stairs to the private jet, Jasmine reflected on how differently the day had unfolded from her expectations. What began as yet another humiliating experience with everyday racism had evolved into something more significant, a very public example of how prejudice could backfire against those who wielded it as a weapon. The confrontation had escalated far beyond a dispute over an airline seat, becoming instead a referendum on corporate ethics and racial bias in American business. Tomorrow's investor meeting would proceed with even stronger prospects than before. But more importantly, the aerospace industry, and perhaps the broader business world, had received a powerful lesson about underestimating black executives. Sometimes justice arrived in unexpected ways, even at 30,000 feet. The private jet touched down at Chicago O'Hare just after midnight. Despite the late hour, Jasmine felt surprisingly alert, her mind still processing the day's extraordinary events. As the aircraft taxied to the private terminal, she noticed several dark SUVs waiting on the tarmac, not the typical executive transportation she'd expected. When the door opened, she was greeted not by a driver but by another FBI agent who introduced himself as Special Agent Marcus Donovan. Ms. Washington, I apologize for the late welcome. We're continuing to coordinate with our D.C. office on the Stevens Aerospace case, and some significant developments have emerged that you need to be aware of. Jasmine followed him to one of the waiting vehicles. What kind of developments? It's better if we discuss this in a secure location. We've arranged accommodations at the Fairmont with a full security detail. The convoy of vehicles moved swiftly through Chicago's nearly empty streets. Through the tinted windows, Jasmine watched the city's iconic skyline glitter against the night sky. Under different circumstances, she might have appreciated the view, but her mind was fixed on Agent Donovan's ominous statement. At the hotel, they bypassed the main lobby, entering through a service entrance and taking a freight elevator to the penthouse level. The suite had clearly been converted into a temporary command center, with agents working at laptops and communication equipment set up throughout the space. Agent Donovan led her to a conference room where Agent Carter was already waiting, having arrived on an earlier flight. Her presence in Chicago rather than Washington, D.C. underscored the seriousness of the situation. Ms. Washington, Carter greeted her. Thank you for your patience. Please, have a seat. The table was covered with files, photographs, and evidence bags. Jasmine recognized several of the photos, they were surveillance images of her. Entering her office building. Meeting with DoD officials. Even picking up her daughter from school. What is this? Jasmine asked, a chill running through her. The full extent of Stevens Aerospace's operation against you and Skyline Innovations, Carter explained. Catherine Mercer's arrest was just the tip of the iceberg. When we executed search warrants at Stevens' headquarters and Mercer's residence, we discovered evidence of a surveillance operation dating back not just 3 months, but nearly 2 years. 2 years. Jasmine repeated incredulously. That's when we first patented our propulsion technology. Exactly, Donovan confirmed. Stevens has been targeting your company since you emerged as a legitimate competitor. But here's where it gets more disturbing. He slid several documents across the table. These are internal Stevens communications we recovered. They specifically targeted you because you're a black woman. Jasmine picked up the documents, her hands steady despite her rising anger. The language was clinical but unmistakable. Washington represents a multiple diversity hire trend in defense contracting. Her company's success is likely attributable to preferential treatment under diversity initiatives rather than technical merit. Recommend aggressive countermeasures as her position is politically protected but technically vulnerable. Another memo was even more explicit. Skyline's DoD relationship appears built on Washington's personal narrative rather than product superiority. Standard competitive tactics unlikely to succeed against emotional/political support. Recommend Operation Windfall to expose technical weaknesses that diversity considerations have overlooked. The naked racism and sexism in these corporate documents, written in professional language and circulated among executives, struck Jasmine like a physical blow. It wasn't just Catherine Mercer, the entire corporate strategy had been built around the assumption that Jasmine's success was unearned, that her company's innovations couldn't possibly be legitimate. This wasn't just corporate espionage, Carter said quietly. It was a systematically racist campaign designed to undermine your company based explicitly on your identity as a black woman. Jasmine placed the documents down carefully. And now, we've identified at least 12 Stevens employees involved in this operation, including their CEO, Jonathan Pierce. All are facing federal charges. The Department of Justice is also preparing a civil rights case based on these documents, which demonstrate clear discriminatory intent in their business practices. Donovan added, Stevens stock has already dropped 17% in after-hours trading as news of the arrest spreads. Their board of directors has called an emergency meeting for tomorrow morning. As the agents continued outlining the case, Jasmine's phone buzzed with a message from Terrence. Stevens Aerospace Board just released statement. Pierce suspended pending investigation. Acting CEO reaching out to offer settlement. Investors calling non-stop. CNN, MSNBC, Fox all requesting interviews. How do you want to proceed? The scale of what was unfolding became clear. This wasn't just about stolen documents anymore. It had evolved into a landmark case highlighting the intersection of corporate espionage and racial discrimination at the highest levels of American industry. There's more, Agent Carter said, interrupting Jasmine's thoughts. When we examined the evidence chronologically, we found something disturbing. Several setbacks your company experienced over the past 2 years appear to have been directly orchestrated by Stevens. She displayed a timeline that correlated suspicious incidents with Stevens' surveillance logs. The unexplained withdrawal of your first major investor, the laboratory fire that destroyed early prototypes, the abrupt resignation of your former chief engineer, the failed FAA certification that delayed your first government contract. Jasmine stared at the evidence, memories flooding back of each crisis. How each one had nearly bankrupted her company, how she'd worked around the clock to overcome them, how some colleagues had quietly suggested that perhaps the aerospace industry was simply too challenging for a company like hers. None of these were accidents or bad luck, she realized aloud. They were sabotage. Systematic sabotage, Carter confirmed. Designed specifically to force you out of the industry. The revelation brought clarity to countless moments of her professional journey. The inexplicable setbacks, the closed doors, the sudden obstacles that appeared just as success seemed within reach. What she had attributed to the ordinary challenges of building a company while black had actually been something more sinister, a coordinated campaign to ensure she failed. Ms. Washington, Donovan said, given the scale of this conspiracy and its explicitly discriminatory nature, the Justice Department is considering this a landmark case. Your testimony will be crucial not just for the criminal proceedings, but potentially for new regulatory frameworks regarding corporate discrimination. Jasmine nodded, her strategic mind already shifting from shock to action. What about tomorrow's investor meeting? Should I postpone? Actually, Carter replied, we believe you should proceed as planned. The investors already know about the Stevens situation, it's breaking news everywhere. Your position is stronger than ever. Donovan handed her a tablet displaying news headlines. Black female CEO targeted in racist corporate espionage plot. Stevens Aerospace executives arrested in federal sting operation. Doge investigation reveals systematic discrimination in aerospace industry. And perhaps most tellingly, Skyline Innovation stock surges 43% as market responds to Stevens scandal. This is a pivotal moment, Carter observed. Not just for your company, but potentially for how corporate America addresses racial discrimination in competitive practices. As the briefing concluded, Jasmine was escorted to her suite. Despite the late hour and the emotional weight of the revelations, she felt a strange sense of validation. The barriers she had faced weren't imagined. The extra effort required wasn't just the burden of being twice as good. There had been an actual conspiracy working against her success. And still, she had prevailed. In her suite, she opened her laptop to review tomorrow's presentation, only to find dozens of new emails from supporters, industry colleagues, and even competitors distancing themselves from Stevens' practices. The most surprising came from Brian Taylor, the flight attendant. Ms. Washington, I've been contacted by several news outlets about what I witnessed on the flight. With your permission, I'd like to speak about how my own unconscious bias initially led me to doubt you rather than Ms. Mercer. I believe this could be an important learning moment for others in customer service positions. Your grace under pressure was a masterclass in professionalism that I won't forget. Jasmine sat back, absorbing the magnitude of what was unfolding. When she'd boarded Flight 2187 earlier that day, she had been focused on securing investment for her company's continued growth. Now, less than 24 hours later, she found herself at the center of a national conversation about race, corporate ethics, and justice. As she prepared for bed, knowing tomorrow would bring its own challenges, she thought about her daughter Zoe and their conversation about the science fair project. What had begun as a routine business trip had transformed into a powerful lesson she could share with her daughter, about perseverance, about fighting back against injustice, and about the importance of speaking truth even when others are determined not to hear it. The revelation of Stevens' conspiracy had exposed more than corporate espionage, it had pulled back the curtain on the systemic racism that often operated in the shadows of American business. For Jasmine Washington, tomorrow's investor meeting was no longer just about funding, it was about reclaiming her narrative and transforming a personal victory into institutional change. By 7 the next morning, the lobby of the Fairmont Hotel had transformed into an impromptu media center. Journalists from major networks clustered in small groups, cameramen adjusted equipment, and producers spoke urgently into their phones. Word had spread that Jasmine Washington, the black female CEO at the center of what was now being called the Stevens conspiracy, was staying in the building. Inside the penthouse suite, Jasmine stood before a full-length mirror, making final adjustments to her appearance before her investor presentation. She had chosen her attire carefully, a tailored royal blue suit that projected confidence without ostentation, minimal jewelry save for her late mother's pearl earrings, and her natural hair styled in a sophisticated updo. Every element was deliberate, balancing professionalism with authenticity in a world that often demanded black women choose between the two. A soft knock at the door announced Terrence's arrival. Despite the monitoring software discovered on his devices, Jasmine had insisted he join her in Chicago. The breach hadn't been his fault, and she needed her most trusted team member now more than ever. Morning, he greeted her, handing over a tablet. I've organized everything. The car is waiting at the service entrance to avoid the media, the investor presentation has been updated with the latest projections, and the FBI has cleared the meeting location. But you should see this first. The tablet displayed Stevens Aerospace's stock price, down 31% since the market opened. A separate window showed Skyline Innovations stock, up 57%, with trading temporarily halted due to volatility. The board officially terminated Pierce and 5 other executives this morning, Terrence continued. Their interim CEO has requested a meeting with you after your investor presentation. Jasmine absorbed this information with measured composure. What's their angle? Settlement talks. Their legal team is in panic mode, the evidence the FBI found is devastating. They're hoping to resolve this before the Justice Department files additional charges. Before she could respond, her phone buzzed with a message from Agent Carter, press conference at 9 a.m. Justice Department announcing formal charges against Stevens executives. Secretary of Defense making statement afterward regarding review of all Stevens contracts. Your investors already know. The scale and speed of the fallout continued to expand. What had begun as a personal confrontation over an airline seat had evolved into a federal case with implications for the entire defense contracting industry. We should go, Jasmine said, gathering her materials. The investors are waiting. As they navigated through the hotel's service corridors to avoid the press, Terrence updated her on the social media response. #CEO Jasmine was trending nationwide, with hundreds of thousands of posts sharing experiences of workplace discrimination and corporate sabotage directed at minorities. You've become a symbol, he noted. People are seeing their own struggles reflected in what happened to you. Jasmine absorbed this with mixed emotions. She had never sought to be a spokesperson for racial justice, her focus had always been on building the best aerospace company possible. Yet she recognized the responsibility that came with her sudden visibility. Their car pulled up to the gleaming skyscraper where Marshall Investments maintained their Chicago offices. Unlike the chaotic scene at the hotel, the security here had ensured no media presence, allowing Jasmine to enter the building without fanfare. In the elevator ascending to the 47th floor, Jasmine checked her presentation one final time. The technical specifications of Skyline's propulsion system remained the centerpiece, but she had added a brief, factual addendum addressing the Stevens situation, acknowledging it without allowing it to overshadow her company's innovations. The elevator doors opened to reveal Marshall's elegant reception area, where Daniel Marshall himself waited to greet her, an unusual courtesy from the notoriously hands-off billionaire investor. "Ms. Washington," he said, extending his hand. "Thank you for maintaining your commitment to this meeting despite yesterday's events." "Mr. Marshall," Jasmine replied with professional warmth. Skyline Innovations honors its commitments, even under unusual circumstances. "So I've observed," he said, with what appeared to be genuine respect. "The conference room is ready whenever you are." The investor presentation that followed departed significantly from Jasmine's original plan. Rather than needing to convince skeptical investors of Skyline's potential, she found herself fielding enthusiastic questions about expansion timelines and production capabilities. The room of primarily white male financiers, who might have questioned her technical expertise just days earlier, now deferred to her authority without hesitation. Given Stevens' actions, one investor asked, "Do you anticipate any challenges with the intellectual property protections on your propulsion system?" "Our patents were filed and approved years ago," Jasmine replied confidently. "Stevens' attempted theft actually validates how superior our technology is, they couldn't compete with it legitimately." Another investor leaned forward. "The Department of Defense appears to be re-evaluating all of Stevens' contracts. Do you have the capacity to absorb that business if it becomes available?" The question highlighted the extraordinary reversal of fortunes. Skyline had gone from fighting for market share to potentially inheriting its competitor's portfolio overnight. "We've maintained scalable manufacturing processes precisely for such opportunities," Jasmine explained. "With proper investment," she smiled slightly, "we could expand production by 200% within 6 months." By the meeting's conclusion, Marshall Investments had committed not just the $75 million Jasmine had initially sought, but an additional $125 million in expansion capital. What had been planned as a routine funding round had transformed into a major strategic investment that would reshape the aerospace landscape. As the investors filed out, Daniel Marshall remained behind. "Ms. Washington, I've been in this business for 40 years, he said, his tone contemplative. "I've witnessed corporate espionage, hostile takeovers, and every manner of competitive sabotage. But I've never seen a case where racism was so explicitly documented as a competitive strategy." Jasmine maintained her professional demeanor despite the painful subject. "Unfortunately, Mr. Marshall, what's unique here isn't that race was a factor, it's that it was documented in corporate communications. This happens far more often than most people realize." Marshall nodded slowly. "I believe you. And that's why, beyond our financial investment, I want to propose something else. Marshall Investments has significant board positions with 37 Fortune 500 companies. I'd like to use that influence to implement anti-discrimination audits of competitive practices across our portfolio." The offer represented something potentially more valuable than the financial investment, institutional change that could help prevent other minority executives from facing what Jasmine had endured. "I would welcome that initiative," she replied. "And Skyline would be happy to consult on developing appropriate metrics." As they concluded their conversation, Jasmine's phone buzzed with multiple notifications. The Justice Department press conference had concluded, and the announcements were even more significant than anticipated. Criminal charges filed against 14 Stevens executive civil rights investigation expanded to include other defense contractors. Special task force established to examine racial discrimination in federal contracting. Stevens Aerospace facing debarment from government contracts pending investigation outside the Marshall Investments building. The media had finally discovered her location. Dozens of reporters waited at the entrance, calling out questions as Jasmine emerged. Ms. Washington, how do you respond to Stevens' claim that this was the action of a few rogue employees? Will Skyline be filing a civil lawsuit against Stevens? Do you believe your race was the primary factor in Stevens targeting your company? Rather than rushing to her waiting car, Jasmine made a split-second decision to address the press. This was an opportunity to shape the narrative, not just for herself, but for other minority entrepreneurs facing similar barriers. "I'll make a brief statement," she announced, stepping to the impromptu microphone stand that had been hastily assembled. The clamor immediately quieted as cameras focused on her. "Yesterday, I boarded a flight as a CEO heading to an investor meeting. I was denied my assigned seat by someone who judged me based on my appearance rather than my ticket. That individual turned out to be part of a corporate espionage operation specifically targeting my company because they believed a black woman couldn't possibly have created superior technology." She paused, letting the statement sink in. They were wrong, not just morally, but factually. Skyline Innovation's propulsion systems are revolutionary because of the brilliant team I've assembled and the inclusive culture we've built. Innovation thrives when we bring diverse perspectives to complex problems. The reporters remained uncharacteristically silent, captivated by her measured eloquence. "Today, I secured investment that will allow Skyline to scale our operations significantly. We look forward to continuing our work with the Department of Defense and commercial aviation partners. As for Stevens Aerospace, I hope this becomes a watershed moment for corporate America. A recognition that discrimination isn't just unethical, it's bad business." As questions erupted anew, Jasmine nodded politely and proceeded to her car. She had said what needed to be said, neither dwelling on the injustice nor minimizing its significance. Back in her hotel suite, she finally had a moment alone to process the whirlwind of events. Her phone rang, the familiar photo of Michael and Zoe lighting up the screen. "Mom!" Zoe exclaimed when she answered. "You're on TV. My whole class saw you. Ms. Peterson stopped the lesson so we could watch your statement." Jasmine smiled, imagining her daughter's excitement. "What did you think, sweetheart?" "You were amazing," Zoe replied with unfiltered admiration. "That lady who took your seat is going to jail, right?" "Yes, probably," Jasmine confirmed gently. "But the important part isn't punishment, it's change. Sometimes bad things lead to better systems for everyone. Like my science project." Zoe connected enthusiastically. "How one problem can create a solution that helps lots of people." "Exactly like that," Jasmine agreed, marveling at her daughter's insight. "I'll be home tomorrow, and we'll work on it together, I promise." After ending the call, Jasmine walked to the window overlooking Chicago's skyline. The aftermath of yesterday's confrontation was still unfolding, rippling through corporate boardrooms and government agencies across the country. What had begun as yet another instance of a black professional being undermined had transformed into a moment of national reckoning about race and corporate ethics. There would be more challenges ahead: congressional hearings, legal proceedings, media scrutiny. But for now, Jasmine allowed herself a moment of quiet satisfaction. The systems designed to hold her back had not only failed but had been exposed in the process. Sometimes justice arrived in unexpected ways, even at 30,000 feet. 3 months after Flight 2187 was grounded, Jasmine Washington stood at a podium in the Pentagon's ceremonial auditorium. Behind her, a massive screen displayed Skyline Innovation's logo alongside the Department of Defense insignia. Before her sat an audience of military officials, industry executives, and media representatives. It is with great pride that the Department of Defense announces the finalization of our 10-year contract with Skyline Innovations for next-generation aircraft propulsion systems, announced Secretary of Defense Eleanor Mathis. This represents not only the largest contract awarded to a black woman-owned business in DoD history but a commitment to excellence and integrity in our procurement process. As Jasmine stepped forward to sign the historic $1.2 billion contract, she reflected on the extraordinary journey that had led to this moment. What had begun as a routine business trip interrupted by an all-too-familiar instance of discrimination had catalyzed a seismic shift in the aerospace industry and beyond. The Stevens Aerospace scandal had grown from a single incident of corporate espionage into the largest corporate fraud and civil rights case in recent memory. The evidence uncovered in subsequent investigations had revealed a pattern of discriminatory practices targeting not just Skyline but numerous minority-owned businesses across the defense sector. Catherine Mercer, the woman who had refused to yield Jasmine's seat, had pleaded guilty to corporate espionage, theft of classified information, and conspiracy charges. Her 20-year sentence reflected not just the severity of her crimes but their motivation, with the judge citing the explicitly discriminatory intent as an aggravating factor. Jonathan Pierce, Stevens' former CEO, and 12 other executives faced similar charges, with trials scheduled for the coming months. The company itself had entered into a deferred prosecution agreement that included a $750 million fine, mandatory diversity audits, and the appointment of an independent monitor for 5 years. But the most significant changes had come not through punishment but through institutional reform. The Stevens scandal had exposed how easily racial bias could be weaponized in corporate competition, leading to new regulations and industry standards. The Defense Department had implemented mandatory blind review processes for technical evaluations. Major investment firms had established diversity audits for their portfolio companies. Congress had passed the Corporate Accountability and Transparency Act, requiring disclosure of discrimination complaints and settlements. After signing the contract, Jasmine returned to her seat beside Terrence, who had been promoted to Chief Operating Officer following his instrumental role in rebuilding Skyline security protocols. In the 3 months since the incident, her company had nearly doubled in size, hiring top talent from across the industry, including Andre Wilson, the young engineer who had spoken up on her behalf during the confrontation. As the ceremony concluded, Jasmine noticed Brian Taylor among the attendees. The flight attendant had kept his promise, becoming an outspoken advocate for anti-bias training in the airline industry. His honest acknowledgement of his own initial prejudice had resonated widely, prompting similar self-reflection among service professionals nationwide. Ms. Washington, Secretary Mathis said as they exited the stage, "There's someone who wanted to meet you." She gestured toward a distinguished older black man waiting nearby, Dr. Robert Jenkins, the pioneering aerospace engineer whose work had inspired Jasmine to enter the field decades ago. Dr. Jenkins, Jasmine said, momentarily starstruck despite her own considerable success. "It's an honor." "The honor is mine," he replied warmly. "I've been following your work for years, but after what happened," he paused, emotion briefly overtaking his professional demeanor. "What you experienced on that flight and how you handled it has created opportunities that weren't possible in my generation." His words underscored the broader significance of what had initially seemed like just another microaggression in a lifetime of them. The incident had forced a national conversation about how racism operated in corporate America, not just in hiring and promotion but as an actual competitive strategy against minority-owned businesses. Later that evening, Jasmine stood at the podium of the National Business Leadership Conference, addressing an audience of executives, entrepreneurs, and policymakers. The organizers had invited her to deliver the keynote address on ethical business practices in the modern era. 3 months ago, I boarded a flight as a CEO on her way to a meeting, she began, echoing her statement from that chaotic press conference in Chicago. What followed was a textbook case of racial discrimination intersecting with corporate crime. But today, I'm not here to recount that story, you've all read the headlines. She paused, surveying the attentive faces before her. I'm here to talk about systemic change. About how individual acts of courage, from the engineer who spoke up when others stayed silent, to the flight attendant who acknowledged his bias, to the investors who recognized talent regardless of race, can transform industries. For the next 30 minutes, Jasmine outlined her vision for an American business landscape where diversity wasn't just celebrated in promotional materials but protected through structural safeguards. She spoke not as a victim of discrimination but as an architect of reform. The true measure of progress isn't how we respond to discrimination when it makes national headlines, she concluded. It's whether we've built systems that prevent it from happening in the first place. That's the work ahead for all of us. The standing ovation that followed reflected more than mere professional courtesy. It represented a collective acknowledgement of a turning point, a moment when one black woman's refusal to accept discrimination had catalyzed institutional change. After the conference, Jasmine's driver took her directly to the airport. Despite her company's meteoric growth and her increasingly public profile, she had maintained her commitment to balance. Tonight, she was flying home to help Zoe put the finishing touches on her science fair project, a promise she intended to keep. As she boarded her flight, the difference from 3 months ago was immediately apparent. The gate agent greeted her by name with genuine respect. Fellow passengers recognized her, some offering quiet nods of appreciation. And when she reached her first-class seat, 2B this time, she found a handwritten note from the captain welcoming her aboard. Settling into her seat, Jasmine reflected on the extraordinary journey that had begun with a seemingly routine act of discrimination. The woman who had refused to acknowledge her rightful place was now facing decades in prison. The company that had targeted her because of her race was paying hundreds of millions in penalties and reparations. And Skyline Innovations was leading its industry not despite its CEO being a black woman, but with the strength that came from diverse leadership. As the plane reached cruising altitude, Jasmine gazed out the window at the clouds below. The confrontation on Flight 2187 had forced America to recognize an uncomfortable truth, that racism in corporate America wasn't just about individual prejudice but about systemic attempts to undermine black success. More importantly, it had demonstrated that when such systems were exposed to light, they could be dismantled and rebuilt more equitably. The flight attendant approached with a beverage service. "Ms. Washington, it's an honor to have you on board. What can I get you?" "Sparkling water, please," she replied with a genuine smile. 3 months ago, she had been denied her seat by someone who couldn't imagine she belonged in first class. Today, she was flying home not just as a vindicated CEO but as a catalyst for change in American business. Justice had indeed been served. Not just for Jasmine Washington, but for countless others who would face fewer barriers because of what her stand had accomplished. What did you think of Jasmine's incredible journey? Has something similar ever happened to you or someone you know? Drop your experiences in the comments below. If this story of justice and resilience resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more powerful real-life stories. Don't forget to share this video with someone who needs to hear that standing up against discrimination can truly change systems. Thank you for watching, and remember, your seat at the table is rightfully yours. Never let anyone tell you otherwise. Jasmine Washington's story teaches us that discrimination often masquerades as misunderstandings, but can hide systematic attempts to undermine minority success. It shows how racism in corporate America isn't just about individual prejudice but can be weaponized as a competitive strategy. When we stand firm in the face of discrimination, we not only defend our own dignity but create opportunities for systemic change. The incident reminds us that speaking up matters, whether you're the target of discrimination like Jasmine or a witness like Andre. One voice can inspire others to acknowledge uncomfortable truths. True progress happens when individual courage leads to institutional reform, when policies change to protect what moral appeals alone cannot. Perhaps most importantly, Jasmine's story demonstrates that success is the most powerful response to prejudice. By refusing to be defined by discrimination and maintaining focus on excellence, she transformed a humiliating experience into a catalyst for industry-wide change. Her journey reminds us that justice sometimes arrives in unexpected ways, and that the most meaningful victories aren't just personal but create pathways for others to follow.